Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Two Wizards and a Mic. My name is Shane,
And I am Andrew.
and we're a couple of old dudes who like to talk about D&D because we like it. So, anything we talk about, we hope pearls of wisdom fall from our lips, and you are able to have a better time at your table. So, I'm sure there's an update for a Kickstarter, maybe a little tidbit.
Yes, short and sweet. So the World of Mirror Kickstarter, our new setting book, all the hardcover books are ordered. A number of them have arrived all over the world. Now we have the soft cover to print. That should happen pretty soon. And the rest of the Kickstarter is pretty much wrapped up. The Mushroom King Kickstarter, the PDF should be finished hopefully like it'll probably be a week or two, but it's getting really close. It's just final editing at this point.
Very
And yeah,
cool.
and if you are interested in either of those, the World of Mirror book, which is right here, the setting book, or if you're interested in the adventure book, both of those are still available for pre-order. And the Mirror public release will likely be early next month.
Very
So yeah,
cool.
we've got a lot on the go.
Excellent, excellent. I just wanted to touch base on that because I was at your place the other day and we played a game. The first session I've played, I think, in almost a year, and I didn't even think to ask, "Hey, where's my book, man? Where are my books? Where are my books, man?" Of course, then I'm like, "Oh, they're not actually ready yet," but so it's very exciting to play the other day. So. But after the game was done, I started thinking about politics in D&D because we had actually in that session we actually had kind of it was like every first session there's always this introductory part of what's going on within this universe,
Mhm.
and that was I think it was cool because this is a part of with the mirror that I think we've been to in a couple of adventures, but not really in the political sense. It was always against some adversary, and that's we were beamed there. We went through portals to get there, stuff like that.
Mhm.
But we never really stuck around to kind of get the lay of the land. And this session for me anyway was I think the first where we were reminded about, okay, you're in this place and here are the players in this particular city that you're in at the moment, and that was a kind of uh, a good refresher for what's actually going on because you just don't want to make people angry when you first waltz into their essentially their territory. So
Not at
um,
first level.
definitely not at first level. There were actually in that session there were a few times where I thought we were going to get into some sort of fisticuffs just with the local authority.
Mhm.
Thankfully, we didn't. We were able to kind of get out of it, but it's always important to think about these things because there's always going to be a mayor. There's always going to be some sort of political party. There's always going to be some clan. There's going to be whoever's in power have internal workings, and it's always good to pay attention to that stuff. So that's what we're talking about today. Andrew, educate me.
Well, you're highly educated already, so that's going to be pretty hard to do. Um, our first session for that campaign, yes, you had been in that city before, but only once. You snuck in once to a temple. I don't know if you remember that. And then you fought a dragon actually in a dungeon deep under the city, a black
I have a
dragon.
vague memory of that.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. I do remember that.
Yeah, pretty epic battle. So that was a long time in a different story. So we started a new story in this huge city, as you said, and there's a king, and as far as politics, and that it's the not only the biggest city on the continent, but it's the biggest city in all of the world of Mir. Um, you know that there are some issues of people being attacked in this one district when you arrived, but somehow the city guard don't seem to be too concerned. So you've already seen the hints of how things might operate there, and you're not sure why things are happening the way they are. So politics can impact the game in many ways. and it can be a part of any type of game. It's funny that people will judge games very quickly and say, "Oh, that game is all combat," or "That game is all exploration," or "That game is all role play." Where most games, there's parts of all of those. Although I think if you don't have a certain amount of action, I don't think the story is that interesting. And there's a reason why the game has armor classes and hit points and weapons for
It's kind of
creatures,
important.
monsters, and characters.
Yeah.
So it's part of the game, really, those three pillars. And we do have a lot of action, but of course, we still have role play and exploration. Politics comes in there. You just like in real life, you can't get away from it. It's part of when you have groups of people, you're going to have politics.
Exactly, which is one of those things that I think people fail to recognize in the real world. Um, so when it comes to when they transfer that sort of way of thinking into the game, then they think that there shouldn't be, some sort of power struggle, or there
Yeah,
shouldn't be this particular group is has power over this group, or and not always in like an evil way, but it's just like, hey, I'm the mayor and
yeah.
don't burn down houses, please, that kind of stuff. So um, and we're wired to do that kind of stuff. We're wired just the way that humans work, the way that a lot of species work in the real world and in fiction. There's always going to be some sort of power dynamic between one group and another, and whether that's I don't know, squirrels and mice, and or orcs and humans. I mean, there's always going to be those kinds
Mhm.
of things, and there's always someone at the top.
Yeah, and there's usually like people have agendas often. And I remember teaching, I was a teacher for a long time, and I loved the teaching part, which should have really been the main part of the job. But there was always politics behind the scenes, and some of it was, people with agendas, and some of it was some of the political correctness, which got out of hand, obviously, for a while. And hopefully things are turning around. Um, but there's also, I remember, like one of the most ridiculous things I saw was we had a meeting once where in the meeting, as the meeting started, it was very clear that the meeting was to decide whether or not to have another meeting. So I actually said that to the group of teachers. I said, "Are we seriously having this meeting to decide if we're going to have another meeting?" And they said, "Yes." So I got up and I left. Because really, like, there's also politics in the gaming community. And
Yeah.
most of that politics in the workplace and in the gaming community is noise. It's usually irrelevant for what's actually going on. It's usually just
Well, yeah.
people talking and plotting, right? And grumbling about something. So in the game, you want to know. It's a good thing to learn what's the current leader of the village or town or city or kingdom you're in. Um, there's often like, obviously the people who are in charge are either powerful or influential or both, and they're NPCs, and they will know a certain amount more than the PCs as well. It's good to introduce these NPCs or have the player characters discover who they are. And it's good always, I think, you know, I'm more interested in the heroic fantasy, although there's lots of versions of the game. And in heroic fantasy, it's nice to have a balance so that there's some allies and some good people in the world. So it's not, depressing, and it's not like the players have nowhere to turn. I think it
Yeah.
adds a nice balance, and it shows you who's good and who's evil too when you have allies. Um, it's also good, to reveal who are the enemy, maybe who are the neutral people who are not maybe involved on. Sometimes people don't have agendas. There are people in the world like that, and you can have them in your game. Um, so, like you just met a barmaid who, yeah, it seems pretty clear she doesn't have any kind of agenda. Um, where you met another character you found out was a lycanthrope, a weir rat, and he obviously had some other kind of
He
agenda going on.
Well, exactly, and what I liked about that encounter was that you, because it was implied that there was, I'm a were rat gang, and help me out here or you're gonna pay. And the character that I had uh, didn't really have an agenda other than it's cruel to keep people in jail, because the party had said that guy's dangerous. We should probably leave him in that cell, and then let him out. And I think my character was expecting some sort of encounter, but you right away you were like, okay, so he takes off for the hills because he doesn't want to be here.
Mhm.
And even though that character has an overall agenda as a member of this gang, they don't necessarily have that agenda all the time. They act, I mean, a were rat. I was going to say they act human, but they act like any creature. Like, there's a time for politics. There's a time for I'm getting out of here because otherwise these crazy people that captured me are going to come back and stab me repeatedly. So, um, yeah, and that's the nice thing about the game, the real world having influences in the game, obviously, where you have these subtle things playing out, and as I always say, it adds a little spice, gives a little life to the world, and I like it. So
Yeah, 100%. And like you say, all NPCs and monsters are going to have some kind of motivation. I mean, other than, there's one NPC I created in Monsters of the City who's super, super lazy. But even he has some kind of motivation. So these characters, non-player characters in the story, and these political animals at different levels, they all have motivations. And if you know that, um, which I remember one of the original creators of fifth edition, the good version, the 2014 version, one of the original creators once he said, if you know the motivations of your monsters and your NPCs as the DM, that's all you can just start the session from there, because that's the most important thing to always keep in mind, and it's so true. So the and that a fair amount of that can be political in nature. So the settlement leaders, local politics, again, there could be villages, towns, cities. They're all going to have leaders. In our World of Mirror book, whether it's a village, a city, town, even the kingdoms, we give you all the leaders. We tell you who they are. We tell you, you know, what their class is, what level they are, what their alignment is. Although, 95% of that book really can be used for any fantasy role playing game. There are a few notes there that are closer to 5e, but really you could use for any game.
right.
There's also different types of governments overall for the whole kingdom area, um, which would include monarchy, which is quite common in the game. So either a king and queen ruling together, separately, maybe one of them's passed away or being killed. There could also be other levels of the monarchy. It doesn't have to be the king or queen. It could be a princess, prince, a duke, a baron, and they have a really strict hierarchy. So that could be really interesting to deal with. And you know, maybe one level of the monarchy deals with the party in one way and another level deals with them in another way. Maybe they make allies or enemies of one, in the monarchy at certain places. Maybe somebody in the court of the king or queen. So monarchies are quite popular, and I have put a lot of those in Mir. Most governments are monarchies in Mir. Um, Dictatorship, that is pretty common in fantasy role playing as well. So a ruler who just does, everybody has to do what they say, which we've had a few of those around our everyday life as well. The dictatorship, we have a number of those in Mir. Military or a militocracy, where the military government, the military runs it, and there's not really a government; it's just the army running things. We have those
Yeah.
in the real world, and we have some of those in the world of Mir. There's one. So one of the big city that you were talking about, Rogan's Gate. Eventually, one of the generals that was part of their military force, because they're a city state, they have an army as well. They were unhappy with the direction of Rogan's Gate, and they were well, they were basically evil. Although lawful, like most of Rogan's Gate, they were evil. So they left and founded a new kingdom, which is a completely it's a militocracy. It's just a military run kingdom, and there's not really a government. The army's in charge of everything. And it's like the pure essence of what lawful evil is. So organized, and in some ways the worst evil because they're organized, right? Like basically like the Nazis. There's also a type of government where there's elders on a council or some kind of council, unelected or elected. That's another way to run a government. We don't have that many of those in Mir because I think that's much more complicated. It can work really well if your council is good, just like strata councils. um, there's also
God.
Yeah, there's also a church could run the show. So there's one kingdom in the world of Mir and one on the continent of Mir and one on the continent of Zog, where this church runs the show. There's not really a government; it's just a church who runs everything.
Right.
Um, so that's kind of a fun thing to do. And both of those kingdoms, they ban the worship or even the mention of other gods. So I can't wait for you guys to deal with them.
Wonderful.
Then there's a mageocracy, which is very unique to fantasy role playing. The first time I ever saw it was connected to the world of Greyhawk, and that is a wizard run kingdom or area, territory. So there is one of those. Actually, no, there's really one, two, three. I think there's three of them in our world. One big one where Wizard Council runs the show. And then we get to democracies. So these are actually rare, um, in the kind of world that D&D usually takes place in, which is a sort of medieval version of the world with some magic. And so I don't have many democracies in the world of Mir, but I have some. So that's a kind of overview of like governments, the politics, the structure that could be around for larger territories. Well, and it could take place in, obviously, they could run the show in a smaller place like that as well.
Right.
There's another example too. One more, a guild or a company, basically, a business could run the whole kingdom. And we have one of those in Mir, which is quite a large kingdom. The last adventure we played was based in that kingdom, the one where you found all those tunnels and you were dealing with the undead invasion. That
Oh
ki-
yeah, yeah.
that kingdom, all the guards, all the leaders, everybody is on the payroll of this company. And again, there's not really a government. It's just a guild that is so big and so powerful they control a large area. Now, when you have a political structure, you might also have laws. If you have a place that functions properly, you're going to. And these are often enforced by the guards, sometimes knights. But if it's an evil place, they might be enforced by, an evil guild or thugs or gangs. And with that come punishments. So here's another political, consequence that the players might have to deal with if they break a law.
Yeah.
The law might be quite strict. You might be thrown in jail right away. You might be fined. You might be banished. I also like the idea of there's some indigenous people. What's the word? It's a certain type of punishment, but it's just not on the tip of my tongue right now. It's where you have to. Oh, it's called restorative justice. So you have
Ah, okay.
to make good, the best way you can for what you've done. And I think in certain cases that's very appropriate. And I understand why you would do that. The Elf Kingdom on the continent of Mir, they banish anyone who commits crimes. You're gone. You don't get thrown in jail. You're not attacked. You're not fined. You're just never allowed back in the kingdom.
Nice.
Yeah. So there's also with this sort of political structure, there's often taxes or tithes. So you might pay for entering a city or using the roads. And sometimes these go to the government, sometimes they go to church or guild, and it's a good way to of the players in the game, the characters having a reason why they might need lots of gold. So maybe they get taxed more as they gain more power. So they maybe they own a castle after a while. Maybe they own a ship, and maybe they're taxed for having the ship in port. They're taxed for their castle. So there's lots of interesting ways you could play with that, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about mid-level and high-level play, which
Right.
isn't as popular as low-level. But I think that can make the game interesting, and again, it can be a way that the characters have something to spend their gold on, because sometimes high-level characters are kind of looking for something to do with all their gold.
That is true. And that has happened excuse me, so many times where uh, you found a treasure trove, you've beaten a big bad, and then suddenly you are sitting around going, I've got like 350,000 gold. I don't know what to do with it. And we ended up, I think, at one adventure, we ended up like there was one adventure where we buried a bunch of stuff. There was another adventure where we took over a castle, and we started, basically created a treasure room essentially. Um, but yeah, these kinds of things are important because you could use that money to influence a local politician. Like, to me, that I think is a missed opportunity in some of our adventures.
Yeah,
Like, that really powerful guy, we should probably give him a little dough and see what he can do for us.
yeah, that's a good point. That's something I'll mention a little bit more when we go along here. There's also connections to factions are definitely a political nature. And we spoke last week about different kinds of factions in our last video. So all those kind of factions have political, um, elements, and all of those connections to factions could play a part in the game. Are the
Mm.
do the players join? Do the characters join the faction? Are they expelled from the faction? Is the faction an ally or an enemy? And then the leader or the leadership, they're going to have minions and stewards, like people who look after the day-to-day operations for them, protection like guards. They're going to have resources. All of that comes into play as well. So there are many ways, again, that you could have this in your game. You could have deal making and negotiations with these political people, influential people. And the player characters might even have to make a speech. You were just talking about ways of influencing these politicians or the powers
Yeah.
that be. You could do all these things to gain influence, as you mentioned, and you could climb the ranks as well in the society. So you could become more influential yourselves, the characters, as they get more powerful or as they find ways to influence those in power.
Yeah, exactly.
And these loyalties that you have with different elements and factions, these can shift. These don't have to remain the same. Maybe a new king comes to power, and the city is being run a certain way, and now that totally changes and it affects your characters. Maybe all of a sudden the characters who had influence are now wanted by the law, right?
Oh, that's a really good point, because you almost kind of assume as a player that the parties that you're making deals with or interacting with have absolute control or are somehow infallible. Because they're NPCs. What kind of stuff could they do that's going to be wrong? You're going to have the ones that say join your party, or the ones you interact with quite a bit. You sort of get to see more about what kind of things are going on behind the scenes. But on a level of a government, I mean, I don't think there's too many ways that I've actually encountered where you get wrapped up in government intrigue in a big way, right? There's no, a government could fall. Like, you could walk out of your tavern, and then suddenly it's like, who are these people that are running around telling people what to do? Oh, look, the castle's on fire. Oh, okay. What just happened? Because you don't necessarily have to know every single thing that's going on in the world as a playing character, because I don't know what's going on in the real world. I have no idea what the hell's going on, down the street, let alone what's going on in another country. But it adds to that kind of stuff where, say, for example, your party donates a bunch of money or gives a bunch of money to a party, and then they suddenly fall, and then suddenly this new ruling party turns and goes, yeah, so going through some paperwork, and yeah, we noticed that you guys are, you donated a lot of money to these people that we just took out. So there's all these kinds of intrigue sort of elements that can happen. So, ooh, this is getting
100%.
exciting. This is getting exciting.
Yeah, I think I mean the possibilities really are endless. Like you could have the big bad evil guy suddenly come into power in the kingdom or city that you're based, and all of a sudden you've gone from being the heroes to the enemy. You could have, you were in one campaign where you discovered the queen of the city state was pure evil, and you discovered that their royal family had basically taken the throne illegally from the true rulers of the kingdom who were still around, but this other family who really were the rulers didn't even know that they actually had claim to the throne. So your party helped them realize that, but it meant that now we had to take out this government, which was illegal government, for the true rulers to take over. And
Right, right.
this actually took about 2 years of gaming time, where this was our really long one of our really long campaigns. I guess we've had three campaigns, I think, that went to 20th. Yeah, that went to 20th level, and this was one of those. So it took over 2 years for you to go from meeting this young woman in the forest who was fighting a bunch of orcs by herself, this ranger, who was a terrible warrior, by the way, to then 2 years later, you installed her as the queen. So
Good
these
times, good times.
yeah. So you can work on these plots for years. I mean, it can develop, over a long period of time. There can be, you mentioned intrigue. This is so much about intrigue. So there can be palace intrigue about, who's doing what in the court, which faction supports the monarch, which doesn't. Maybe there's guilds and factions in the city or the kingdom that don't support the king or do, or noble families. Nobles are definitely influential, and that's something we've noted in our supplement, Factions of Mir, which we gave to our Kickstarter backers, well, the ones of people who backed it. That we might publish that as well. That has all these factions, and it also has nobles listed, because a lot of these families can have quite a bit of power.
Yeah,
And these
exactly.
guilds and like you said, the guilds and political groups they need funding. A lot of times they need funding. Somebody's got to pay for the guards. Somebody's got to build the ship and build the wagons and build the mansion and the castle, and run the castle.
And that's important to think about because I think quite often, either just due to inexperience or lazy writing, um, there have been these sort of elements where uh, these groups have come to power because, well, A, money, two, savagery or whatever kind of brutality they're doling out, or maybe maybe they're like, hey, everyone should be fine, let's all get high, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, it all takes money to run these institutions, regardless of what kind it is. And I think that comes from, like, possibly, I don't know. Let's pretend for a moment there's a wizard who's in power, and part of that power is that they can raise the dead. So suddenly they have these armies of the undead, which maybe, I guess, is a pretty cheap way to go. You're raising 5,000 dead army members. Okay, great. You don't have to pay them. I mean, that's kind of cost savings right there. Is necromancy, but ultimately, for everyone else, it is definitely something that I think it can get forgotten quite easily. It's like they have all this power, and you're in jail now, or you're being attacked, or you're being followed, or you're having to force to join, or whatever it might be. And but at the end of the day, even NPCs need to eat and sleep and do these sorts of things, and that requires a wage. That requires, a lot of things, and they're not
Hmm.
always indentured slaves or something. It could be that Joe the guard, who you encounter day one of your adventure, actually goes home, and you might find out later on if you roleplay enough that Joe the guard, who you first met and thought he was kind of a jerk, has actually got like Tiny Tim at home that needs medicine or something. That they actually have a life beyond being a jerk at work.
Yeah, I like that the first kid name that you came up with was Tiny Tim.
It's Tiny Tim, exactly.
So yeah, it's it's as I said, I think it's endlessly interesting. If it's a realistic world, the political factions are going to probably be tied to the economy in some way, into, you know, food that's being produced or forestry or mining. There's going to be other connections there. There's also the possibility of having cover-ups, which is really interesting and fun.
Yeah.
Um, what do you mean you saw a witch last night in the market? No, you didn't. She was meeting with the Baron. The Baron wasn't even here. You can have NPCs who present like really interesting facades, right? And this actually can be magical or non-magical,
Yeah.
um, right? They can be disguised. You can have obviously spies and double agents, so you can have really interesting story with that. Maybe the party catches a spy, and maybe they're allied with the monarchy at the time, but they catch this spy in the castle. But then the spy actually educates them, and they find out that the king is evil and that this spy is
Exactly.
actually good. So there's so many ways you can play with it. There is also competition between different elements of the political, different factions. So there can be competition, whether it's in a monarchy or if it's a council that runs the show. That's interesting too. Maybe council members are competing against each other. Some people in the competition, they're interested in fame. Some people are interested in money, fortune, and some people are just interested in power. So there's a lot of things that you can play with there. With all of this political angle, there can be a fame element, there can be a fortune element, there can be a power element, and some of them want all of them. There's also intimidation that could be happening, sabotage, even assassinations. That's how Skyrim starts, right? That one of the leaders is assassinated, and this has thrown the whole kingdom, into chaos, just like World War II. No,
Uh, World
World
War
War,
One with the
World War. Yeah, the Society of the Black Cat or something. I can't remember what it's called.
Society of the
Seriously,
Black Cat. That's
seriously,
awesome.
I think that's what they were called, something like that.
Okay, I'm googling that.
Yeah, so you can check
Society
it.
of the Black Cat.
Yeah, it was like in Constantinople or something in the Hungarian Austro-Hungarian Empire, something like that.
I'm gonna have to. I'll look that up later. That's kind of awesome.
Sure. So then there's also the question of honor, like maybe the political faction you're working to deal with, trying to have influence, learning about, maybe they're all about honor. Maybe they're not about money and fame and power. Maybe they actually have like integrity. I know it'd be
Well,
hard
you
to
think of like, well, you think of like the Klingon Empire. In theory, it's all about the idea that you have to have an honorable life and these kinds of things. Even
right,
though we can write off Klingons as being, oh, they're just warrior crazy. No, they're not.
right,
That's part of their culture, but ultimately it's all about honor for them. So
right.
that informs that entire society and creates that entire government and all those every facet
Yeah.
of that political system comes back to it. So yeah, I think that's highly important for people to recognize.
Yeah, it can definitely be an element. It could be a monk brotherhood, it could be something like that, a knighthood. Maybe the monarchy is just, that, maybe they're responsible, honorable people. There's, when you mention that about the Klingons. I think actually right away, for some reason, are the companions again in Skyrim, this fighters guild who do have a code. Like it's not just there's certain things they're not going to do. So these political games that could be played, political relationships, they could have many different aspects to them. It could be there could be a lot of integrity involved. It doesn't have to just be blackmail and backstabbing.
Well, I remember, speaking of companions and their how they were raised and that kind of stuff. I remember having one companion who didn't want to hurt anybody. They were just basically,
Right,
if they got attacked, sure, they would defend themselves,
right,
but they were not going to go out. We're like, the moment they see, hey, we gotta murder that guy, we're going down. And then suddenly you're like just tooling along a trail, and then suddenly some sort of magical bolt streams across the screen, hits somebody you didn't quite see yet, and suddenly you've got 40 things that are coming to kill you.
right.
Like, oh yeah.
Yeah, so you could have a lot of different aspects. It doesn't have to be black and white for these political relationships. Reputation could be important. The reputation of the party, of individuals
Yeah.
in the party, reputations of the government, of their minions and people that work for the government. So the reputation of the place. Like maybe you've dishonored the city or the kingdom. Maybe you've dishonored your people. Your so there's a lot you can do, and there's also magic can come into it in the way that people are able to hide who they are, disguise
Mhm.
themselves, disguise what they're thinking, disguise their powers, disguise what they look like. So there are, we could talk. I mean, I could talk for sure for 2 or 3 hours about this. So there's so many ways that this can be a part of the game, and it can add to the game. And in our world book, we give you so many story ideas that are connected to this to this
What?
factor, this
There's a
political.
resource section in your book? What? No.
Well, even more than the resource sector, every village, town, city, and kingdom, you're given some hints about what their motivations are and what's going on there and what the leader's up to. And then we add to that in the factions book. So yeah, I think it can be a really, really cool part of the game.
And where can I get these resources of which you speak?
We will put the links below. And as I think about it more and more, I think we should publish that factions book. I think a lot of people would like it. It adds
I
more
agree.
it adds more depth. So you will hear a bit about the faction in the main world book, and then this other book goes into more detail. It tells you things like how many horses they have and what's their symbol and what's their motto and some more details about the history and their motivations. But you have a good idea with the world book, and then it expands on it.
Yeah, which is great because I think that as somebody who's run games, as somebody who's played as a player for the most part, um, I think that more is better in this case, especially when it comes to the world building aspect of these things. Unless you're doing your own home brew and you've got it all in your head or whatever. But if you're playing another game or another person's world, like in an adventure book that's come out, or that you've played a million times, I think that having just a little bit more information that you can then, of course, running the game, you can be like, yeah, that's cool, but you know what, I got it, or somebody might be going, I don't want, why are these guys here? Why are they fighting with that other group? And how does that going to affect the party? So you give them all that information. I think that's actually way better. Especially, you need to know how many horses they have, because horses don't just grow on trees.
Well, yeah, and if I think about our first game there, the first session of that campaign, so there were one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, at least 8 factions that you could have come into contact with, and you came into contact with
I want to say 3.
Three, yeah, I think you're right. I think three. And it's just again in my games, I want the players to choose what they're going to do. They can go where they want, and I have to figure it out. So and go with the flow. And obviously I have an overall story and plot, and but within that, there's a lot of choice for the players, and so you could have on that first session you could have run into 8 different factions with different motivations and political um, aspirations and political goals, but you did run into 3, and one of them is very clear cut. You probably don't have to won't have to do with anything that they're involved with, and they might not be that large. One, you're not sure, you're pretty sure what they do, but you're not sure how big or powerful they are. And then the other one, again, you don't know how large or how powerful they are.
Right.
So yeah, it's always a part of the game to a certain degree. Let's put it that way.
Well,
You
well,
can add,
exactly, and you couldn't not have it because that's how our universe. I mean, this is the thing. Our world, from the first time somebody figured out how to write something down or make chalk drawings on a cave wall, you know damn well that even back then,
yeah,
which it might have been very simplistic, it could have been like the biggest person that's in the tribe is gonna the one who gets eat first. You know, these kinds of
Ross was
hierarchies.
terrible drawing.
Exactly. But
I will
all
draw now.
these, I draw now. You no more draw. But yeah, I mean these hierarchies have existed forever, and we've just made them more complex or more refined or whatever over the
Yeah,
centuries, and it's been uh, you can't escape it. I mean,
no,
I
no,
live
no.
in a country. There's a higher. I can't go outside right now and start going. Ah, you know what? I love being naked. Everyone, check out my amazing naked body. You know, there's gonna be a police officer coming by pretty shortly going like, dude, are you okay? And would you like to go to jail? Um, these kinds of things, these infrastructure exist. These hierarchies, these facilities, these, I'm going to say police, but guards, there's all these kinds of things that exist. And I think I have played games where that hasn't really been a thing because the player or the person running the game has an idea that we should all be free to do whatever we want,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
is fine. But if that means that you don't encounter any hierarchies of any kind,
yeah,
that just leads to a boring game because you're never going to really. What's the point? There's the I'm going to get the
yeah.
big bad who's just this guy on a hillside. Okay.
Right. Yeah, I think you can have that for a while. I mean, there's areas in the world of Mir that are not as organized, um, and there's places that are more chaotic. But a lot of those sort of settlements or kingdoms are not going to last very long because of that. So the places that remain and the places that are more orderly that you might end up, going to get supplies or to stay at an inn or eat at a tavern, those places exist. They're going to have to exist in an orderly place to a certain degree, for them to function. So it's and when you have that, then you're going to have politics.
Politics in D&D. It's a wide breadth of nightmares, and sometimes you actually have. Well, actually, to be honest, I think every time you encounter some sort of kingdom or whatnot, there's always some trepidation. But we've even I remember playing where I've run into nice kingdoms where they actually run a pretty good thing and everyone's treated equally and these kinds of things. And but there's somewhere hiding in the shadows. There's always going to be a worm tongue ready to kind of stab you in the back. But I think that this is a huge component of the game, and I mean, look at the Greyhawk map. Look at the Phelan. You'll see shields indicating what group is there, who's in charge, and sometimes it's pretty small. Sometimes it's a vast thing, and But how did it become a vast thing? Well, hey, that kingdom next door, I don't like them anymore. Let's go get them. And players can get caught up in that kind of stuff, which is always an interesting flavor of the game. So, yeah, I think it's as you said, it's a you can't escape it. It is going to be there whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
So, any final words about politics in D&D, or anything about the Kickstarter, or any sort of final tidbits?
I would say about if people are interested in, having that kind of depth in their game and lots of factions, and they're probably really going to like the world of Mir. And one thing we did, which is also true for Greyhawk, is that you can really easily take your homebrew adventure and your ideas and your factions and port them into Mir. It's a really good template, just like Greyhawk in many ways, because both of them are functioning, realistic worlds, and there's space in there. We didn't fill every part of it, and we didn't define every little aspect. So there's still places where any kind of adventure can happen. So yeah, if you're interested, check the link below. And again, the public release, if you're not going to pre-order, that should be early next month.
Very cool. Well, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has watched and or listened, and I definitely encourage you to subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more of our pearls of wisdom, because we do this for the fun of it, and we also like sharing information that sometimes we find lacks a little bit. One of the things that we encountered many times was people talking about Wizards of the Coast for 7 hours. We'll do that once in a while, but it's not really our main focus. We kind of, because the main reason is, as we always say, it is just a game. It is supposed to be fun, and if you get wrapped up a little bit too much and everything else, then it gets old and gets stale, and you don't want to play it anymore. But we will encourage you to play more, and we will encourage you, hopefully, to play better. And hey, if you want to ask us questions, by all means, you can totally do that. You can send us a message on the podcast, the audio podcast, comment, of course, on the YouTube version, and hopefully we'll have some great conversations, and you'll tell us what we should be talking about next. That was a mouthful, but thank you, everyone, and we'll see you guys next time.
Later.